data in action using the CalPASS Plus Foster Youth Data Dashboard. Good to have you all here. We are fortunate to have Ken Sori with us from Ed Results Partnership to help explain the data dashboard in the CalPASS Plus system. But before that, Ken, if you can change slides, I want to mention a couple of technical details. Change, yes. So we are recording the webinar, and it will be posted at the web address that you see in front of you. I will also post that address at the end of the presentation to make it easy for you to access it again, so you can share this with other colleagues or review it at your own leisure. If you want to ask questions, we ask that you type them in to the section in your control panel for questions. You see the arrow pointing here. And then we will organize those questions and answer them all at the end of the webinar. And also we recommend that you use your phone rather than the computer. It just improves the quality of the sound. So that number is available in the control panel that you see in front of you. Okay, so I'm Deborah Pruitt, and I'm just going to introduce you to a few of the basics on the data dashboard, and then Ken Sori will be able to go into depth on what it can offer you. Our purpose today is to make sure that you really understand the data that's available to you on foster youth through the CalPASS Plus system and the really helpful data dashboard that's been developed so that you'll have more access to information to help you in developing your program. So next slide, Ken. So I want to start with just mentioning, a few things that are important about data and why we put so much emphasis on it in working with the colleges. So obviously, it's helpful to immediately identify areas of need for foster youth. So when you look at your data, you'll see in the data dashboard, you'll be able to see how foster youth are doing, if they're completing their courses, and other areas such as one we're really interested in right now, which is, are they getting the financial aid that they qualify for? So it can help you to really target how you're helping your students. And of course, it can help you track the effectiveness of your program, and in light of that, inform your program design, help you decide where you might want to increase services or change what you're doing and improve how you're serving the students. Having that information about what's working, what's not working so well, that's extremely valuable. Then, of course, especially as a learning community, we're really interested in identifying the best practices that others can learn from, the things that you're finding real success with, so we can spread the good news. And of course, having this kind of information from your own programs and the students on your campus can help support your requests for funding. If you want to go to your college's foundation or outside funders, then to expand the program and the support, the direct support you're able to give your students, having evidence for that will really help. And that leads to what we at John Burton Foundation spend a lot of our time on, which is supporting legislation that will improve the outcomes for foster youth. And having data from your colleges really helps us make that case in Sacramento. Hence the time we're spending on the topic. And so here's a few things to keep in mind when you start working with or continue, expand your work with data. One is that it can be messy. The fact is that the more we learn and the more we analyze data, the more questions it usually raises. And that's a good thing, as it keeps us moving further down the track to greater understanding. It's also flawed, and that's partially because data is always a challenge to interpret and understand, but many of you are working on campuses where maybe few people, if anyone, has paid attention to the data on foster youth in particular to check for accuracy. So there may be errors. You might be under-reporting the foster youth on your campus or over-reporting, or there may be errors in tracking their completion rates and so forth. So it will take some time and diligence to continue to improve the quality of the data. And then it's important to just acknowledge that it can be sobering that as you see the realities of foster youth on your campus, it may help reveal some of the barriers that are really in their way. And that's sobering, but it's also exciting because it really helps you see where you can apply your efforts and maybe make the biggest difference, and can help you feel really excited about what you're doing because you can also see where what you're doing is making a difference. Next slide. So now I'll turn it over to Ken, who can get down into many more of the details and help you understand the value that's in front of you on the data dashboard. Thanks, Ken.
Great. Thanks, Deborah. My audio okay?
Yes, sounds good.
Okay, great. Great. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background of how the data dashboard came to be. Several years ago, under the auspices of the California College Pathways Initiative, a number of funders and practitioners came together to try to sort of come to some consensus about what, if we were to measure what was happening to foster youth as they transition to college and hopefully complete, what would be some of the key milestones and momentum points that we agree would be important to pay attention to. And so we spent a lot of time sort of going through and organizing things that were important, that we wanted to be able to track, and then also that we're able to track, and mainly that the data was there. And this is all predicated, obviously, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, on having better and more accurate flags for foster youth within our college data systems. But really what we wanted to do is sort of come around some common goals and sort of a collective impact or shared measurement system that we can all agree would be important to track. So really what we're trying to hopefully promote is increasing the likelihood that foster youth are meeting these milestones and momentum points and completing at or above the rate of the general population of students. And we have some good bright spots there, but we also have some challenges that we'll talk about as we go through the dashboard. So we were able to sort of bring these all together and sort of organize them into some key buckets or components of getting students to and through college. And so it really starts with whether students are equipped with the essential resources like financial aid and college preparation. Are they enrolling and getting into the courses that they need? Are they progressing, in terms of completion rates and retention? And then are they earning the degrees and certificates and transfers that we hope would be ultimately their goal in a reasonable amount of time? And then downstream, as we get more and more data and more longitudinal data, we can start to connect this up with whether they're embarking on a living wage job in an industry that gives them a career ladder that can help them be successful. So, or going on to further education to a bachelor's degree or graduate school. So just a little bit of background on CalPASS. CalPASS Plus is the backbone of the data dashboard and one of the partners in all of this work. And really what it is a project of the Chancellor's Office that's been around for about 12 years or so. My organization, which is a nonprofit in Sacramento called Educational Results Partnership, joined with San Joaquin Delta College to take over management of this system about 4 years ago. And the goal of this system is really to connect data across segments, so from K-12 or even pre-K through the system of K-12 education onto community colleges and then onto universities and then ultimately into workplace outcomes through employment data and wage data. It's a voluntary system. It's completely free to colleges and any participating institution. And it's managed by sort of data governance or data sharing agreements that institutions sign to voluntarily participate, and then they put in their data into the system so that we can make these connections. The great thing about it is that it's helping us answer some of those questions that we always had but never really had solid data to back it up. And so if you're in a K-12 environment, you can find out what's actually happening to our students as they go to college. Where did they go? How are they doing? Are they starting in basic skills? Are they moving through and progressing at a reasonable rate? And are they completing? And that's just information that our partners have never really had. So it's a way for us to do that in a way that's helpful to the field and also at a very, obviously free system that people can take advantage of. Why we do this? Well, the main point of all of this is really to think about backward mapping from getting students to those living wage jobs or the stackable career ladder, and then where are the transition points along the education to workplace pipeline that we can start to create some shared action. So as students transition, say, from high school to community college, there's a transition point where we lose a lot of students, and that's a function of both preparation and getting students ready to be successful in college, as well as a number of institutional barriers that students face, particularly foster youth, as they go through. And so with the data connected intersegmentally, we can start to have meaningful conversations regionally or locally about what can we collectively do around those transition points to pave the pathway for students to make it much more likely that they'll complete. So a couple of the places that we really hang our hat around the data is this issue of college readiness, and a lot of that has to do with learning from higher performing systems, K-12 districts and schools, who's doing a better job of getting students more prepared for college. And then as they transition, working with the data to connect it to the colleges so that we can start to really impact a more informed placement process for getting more students out of the basic skills sequence and increasing completion rates. And then increasingly aligning what students are studying in the colleges and universities towards the workplace so that we're bridging the nexus between the skills that employers need and the programs and courses and competencies that students develop through the academic programs, as well as some of the social emotional learning that needs to happen. So you can see on this slide too, this is a picture of the homepage for CalPASS where you can access the foster youth dashboard. So what do we get out of the foster youth dashboard? Well, we're able to key in on key metrics such as things like remediation that we talked about. Are students maintaining a GPA that helps them at least meet satisfactory academic progress, if not being more successful? Are they completing courses? Are they accessing financial aid, and which kinds of aid? And is there a difference there? Are we retaining students? Are they coming back the next year? And if not, where do we figure out what's happening to those students? What kind of enrollment numbers do we have? Are we adequately identifying foster youth in the system? And are they coming from high school and enrolling in the college? Are they full-time or part-time, et cetera? Are they accessing CTE programs? And is that a viable option for them that they may or may not be attuned to? And then increasingly, we can also look at what kind of students or which students are accessing some of the campus support participation or programs that are critical for foster youth to be successful. And then ultimately, we can look at completion rates and whether students are actually getting to their academic goals. So in order to get to the dashboard, it's actually quite straightforward. One of the things that you will have to do if you are looking to get into the data is, if you haven't already done so, is to be able to log in and request access to the dashboard. So that's going to require just a request on the website, and then we just verify the email address as being associated with an institution and get approval to give you access. It shouldn't take very long, but that's a pretty simple thing to do. And you would basically go to the website, calpassplus.org. There's big blue buttons. One's called Community Colleges. You would open that up, and then you'll see a link to helpful reports. And then from there, you'll see a pretty obvious foster youth report that you can click on and get to the dashboard. And then the parameters and refresh I'll show you in just a second. Deborah, feel free to pause if there are any questions. I'm kind of going through these pretty fast. So this is the first screen that you'll come to on the dashboard. And you'll see at the top that there's a number of parameters that you can select. The first one is, the first view is obviously for all colleges aggregated together, but you can then click that drop down and get to your own college. You can select the academic year, and it's important to think about if you're looking for longer term outcomes, you may want to go back to a previous year to give yourself more time, or if you want to get more of an accurate enrollment count, you can click on that. We're just loading the 14-15 data into the system, and that should be live in a few days, but this is just an example from 13-14. Then you can click on another option for which types of students. So you can look at all students, or you can look at full-time or part-time. And then the program tab I'll talk about in a little bit, but this is an option where you can actually load a cohort of students into the system that are participating in a particular program, like Guardian Scholars, or we'll talk a little bit about the tab we'll be building for KPs as well. And it's a great way to be able to then isolate specific students that are getting services as compared to other foster youth that are not, and then the general population, to see how you might be impacting certain outcomes. Once you change any of these variables, then you need to click the refresh button, and then that'll reload the data based upon what you selected. And then you can see across the top of the display of the data, we have the 4 different tabs that you can click on for equip, enroll, earn, and embark. And each one has a different set of metrics that you can look at. And then we'll come back to the top comparables, but it's a way to benchmark against those colleges that are demographically comparable to see who might be getting better results on the metrics. So the first screen that opens up is distinct count, and this will be consistent across all of the different sections of the website. And it just shows you how many foster youth are included or flagged, in this particular case statewide, but if you're at an individual college, you'll see how many foster youth you're reporting to have. I just want to remind everybody that these counts come directly out of the MIS data system for the Community College Chancellor's Office. So we're dependent upon colleges and their systems for flagging foster youth. And we'll talk about in a little bit how the different colleges are improving that process. But the data is only reflective of what's in there from what your college submits to the Chancellor's Office. So you can see in the counts, we give you the total number, as well as what number of students attempted at least one math, English, or ESL course. And that's important as you start to look at some of the basic skills numbers that will come later. And then breaking it down further with any math course attempted and any English course attempted. And then you can see the percentages as well as the comparison of non-foster youth at the college or across the state and their percentages on the right. The next screen would be college preparedness. So you just basically click on that little plus and it'll open up and then give you the metrics below each of the sections. So in this particular case, we're looking at things like remediation. So in this case, you can see that of the students who attempted a math or English course or ESL course, which ones of them were below transfer level and the percentage. So in this particular case, you can see about 85% of the foster youth who are in our colleges in California are being placed into a below transfer level course in mathematics. In English or ESL, it's about 75%, and the general population is at about 60%. So you can see that we already have a disproportionate impact of foster youth within this particular measure. And then you can see below that what percentage of students who attempted their first math course was below transfer level, who then completed the transfer level course in math within 2 years. So this is a very important one. As we know, the further down students are placed in the sequence, the less likelihood they have of ever completing the sequence and then going on to a meaningful outcome. And you can see that we have quite a large drop in students who actually complete the sequence based upon those who attempted a math course originally. And then in English, there's also a pretty large drop down to about 31% who complete the sequence. And it's lower. The numbers are also sobering for the general population, but the foster youth are even lower than that. Okay, so let's move on to the next option, which is financial aid. So you can get a breakdown of students who are initially accessing financial aid of the population. You can see for foster youth it's about 82%, which is pretty good, and it's only about 52% for non-foster youth. But where we start to see patterns that are troubling, but also may be an opportunity, is the differences between the different types of aid. So you can see in this particular case that where students are accessing BOG fee waivers at about 81%, only less than 50% of them are actually accessing a Pell Grant. This is something that we've seen as a trend across colleges where students that are foster youth are most likely eligible for Pell Grants, but we're not seeing them actually access those at a rate that we would expect, given the fact that 80% or 81% are accessing a BOG fee waiver. And then another important aspect of financial aid is whether they're continuing to receive it after the first year. And so you can see the next metric is in the second year, what percentage of students are continuing to receive aid. And you can see we have a pretty large drop of those students who continue to receive aid and an equal distribution across the different types. Okay. moving on. So one of the key factors, obviously, in continuing to receive aid is whether students are maintaining satisfactory academic progress. So we've kind of isolated it primarily around the grade point average. And you can see that foster youth compared to non-foster youth are achieving a 2.0 or higher at a much lower rate. It's a little under 50%, and only about 26% are achieving a 3.0 or higher across the state, compared to about 43% for non-foster youth. We also look at persistence and completion rates, so you can see that of foster youth, only about 35% are enrolled in 3 consecutive terms starting in the selected academic year. So we were in 12-13, I think. And so we had enough time to be able to see them come back the next year, and only about 35% of the students are doing that. And then of those, of the students who are foster youth, only about 25% are completing 30 or more units in the same college, compared to about 36 or 37% for non-foster youth. And then completion rates, course completion rates, we measure them by successful course completion. So that would mean they're getting a C or better, or passing the course if it's a pass-fail. And students that are foster youth are doing so at about a 52% rate, compared to about 68% for non-foster youth. So these are all really important metrics to keep track of, and to really look at not only what is the baseline for foster youth and is that improving over time, but also what's the difference between foster youth and the general population, because ultimately our goal is to make sure that foster youth are at least achieving these milestones at the same rate as the general population. Okay, in terms of Embark, these are metrics that really are probably going to take a little more time to be more accurate, so I do give you some caution, because in this particular case, I believe we only have about 3 years of time lapse between when the students first entered. So as you know, many of the metrics, particularly on the Community College Chancellor's Office scorecard, are looking at 6-year increments to reach these milestones. And so in this particular case, we can continue to monitor this as years go by, but you can see that of the students who are foster youth, only about 9.2% are taking 9 or more units in the CTE program of study. And CTE students are completing a degree, certificate, or transfer at about a 22% rate, about pretty close to the general population as well. And then you can see in terms of academic achievement, 6.3% are completing a certificate, AA, or transfer. And then you can see the breakdown of those below in terms of which types of outcomes. Okay, so just shifting gears a little bit now. So I mentioned this before, but this is a really powerful tool that we've added recently, where colleges can very simply have a certain number of identifying elements of a student population that are foster youth in a particular program, and can provide that to the data system so that we can match it up with their outcomes. And so what you would basically do is, you see under the program tab, you would be able to see your data there for a particular group of students, and the way you upload that data is to click this red button that says Upload Data. And what that looks like is you'll come to a screen where you first, if you need to know how you want to organize the data, you just download this template at the top to be able to give you the format. It's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of data, but you probably will need to work with your IR department to just create that cohort. And then you're able to then just select the file type, the academic year that it represents, and then you just browse and upload the file from your computer. You may want to just add in some comments, these are students from our Guardian Scholar program, et cetera, and that's optional to do that. Once you have all that done, you just click Upload, and then that data will be able to populate pretty quickly. It'll probably take us a day or two, and then you can go back in. You'll get notification that it's been accepted, and then the data will be loaded into the system so that you can see under the Program tab, then you can click and see your college and then find your program, and then you'll be able to populate all of the metrics below. Okay. So a couple of things that we're working on with the dashboard, just to keep you up to date. One of the things that we'll be doing this year is reorganizing the data display. So moving a little bit away from the level or blinds where you're just getting sort of tables of data, to make them a little more accessible. So one way we're going to do that, much like we've done on some of our other dashboards, is to focus the data around key questions that practitioners would likely have about students. So things like, where are students taking courses? What kind of students are taking the courses in terms of demographics? Are they progressing in the pathway? Are students succeeding, et cetera? And then as you click on any of those, you can see a display where we'll give you pie charts and different ways to organize it by the data elements. And so these are pretty handy ways you can just sort of cut and paste or download these visual images and put them into PowerPoints or use them in reports or whatever you want. The other piece that we'll be building is a specific tool for CalPASS. And now that we have a flag for those students and those districts and colleges that have received that funding, we'll be able to organize the data, particularly around that program. And the third thing I'll mention is that right now, because we've been limited by just a few years of data for foster youth, we're really sort of giving you snapshot data by a particular year, which may include students from numerous years at that particular point in time, but we're not really tracking those cohorts forward. So what we now will be able to do is allow you to look at a student cohort from a particular year and then track them very specifically through the different years and milestones as you go through. And that'll be important to be able to have those two different views so you can look at longitudinally, what are the trends, are these numbers going up or down in terms of completion rates or GPA, and that'll just give you a better feel for whether things seem to be improving or stagnating within each of these metrics. Okay. One of the other pieces that we add to this, and I mentioned it earlier, is the ability to sort of benchmark on these data. So when we put all of this information together for colleges and even for K-12 partners, our goal is really to try to figure out where there are bright spots in the data and how do we start to connect practitioners peer-to-peer to learn what are some of the effective practice that seem to be providing for better results compared to other colleges that have similar populations. And so with each of the metrics that we have on the dashboard, you can click on the top comparable tab at the top, and then it will basically, based upon the college that you selected, it will find colleges that have similar student populations in terms of socioeconomic status, in terms of the English learner population that is in the K-12 environment, and try to sort of give you at least a list of colleges that would be somewhat similar to your college in terms of the student population. And then for each component, you can see we give you what is the state average and what is the statewide average gap between foster youth and non-foster youth. In this particular case, we're looking at number of students who received a Pell Grant. And so you can see that in this particular case, there are colleges at the top that seem to be getting a higher rates than the statewide average in terms of students receiving Pell Grants, and also have a reduction in the gap between foster youth and non-foster youth. So in this particular case, you can see that the colleges vary in terms of the population of foster youth, and so you may want to take that into consideration when comparing to your particular situation. But like, for example, San Joaquin Delta College has about 98 foster youth identified, and of those, about 66% are accessing a Pell Grant versus the statewide average, which was below 50%. Here's another example of persistence rates. So again, these are the students who are coming back 3 consecutive terms, and the statewide average in this particular case is about 31%, and the gap is a negative 2.1 between foster youth and non-foster youth. And then in these colleges at the top here, you'll see Santa Ana College has a persistence rate that still is not great, but it's much larger than the statewide average at about 47%. And has a positive gap between foster youth and non-foster youth. So in essence, the foster youth are outperforming the general population in terms of persistence rate. So these, again, might be colleges that are worth a phone call to talk to the Foster Youth Success Initiative coordinator or other people on the college that might have some insights as to what they do to help foster youth get return and continue to persist through the academic program. Okay, so this all really works only if we're accurate in how we're flagging foster youth. And this is really dependent upon what we call the checkbox within your student information system that then is uploaded to the Chancellor's Office MIS system. And so Some colleges are really good at this. Others just sort of rely upon the first wave of identifying foster youth, and that's really done through primarily through the CCC Apply application, where there are questions in there about whether students have ever been in the foster care system. And that, helps us to get a pretty good baseline, but as we know, that kind of self-reporting can be a little, have some errors in it, in so much as there may be some stigma where a student just decides that they want a new start and don't want to identify as a foster youth. Others may over-identify. So it's always kind of a work in progress. So these are just some different ways that you might supplement how students are being identified. So the primary one, as I mentioned, is CCC Apply. But colleges are increasingly looking at other access points for where students might be identified, like the FAFSA application, and can cross-reference to see if there are some students who are in that identification process that may not have been picked up in the self-report. There are also things like priority registration lists, EOPS rosters, where EOPS coordinators may know that there are certain foster youth and they don't seem to be represented in the original application file. There are Chafee grant rosters for those that apply for the Chafee grants. And then there's just foster youth support programs where if they're given access to be able to see the list of foster youth who came through CCC Apply, oftentimes they can identify students who they know are accessing the foster youth support program and they know personally that aren't showing up on the list. And colleges sometimes are even given the foster youth support program people the ability to update that list of foster youth within the student information system. So these are just different ways that you might be able to supplement and make sure that we're increasing the accuracy of identifying foster youth. Okay, so just to sort of put all this in a bow, having all of this data can be a little bit overwhelming. So I think the best way to kind of think about it is how might you take the different elements within the dashboard and start to put them together in sort of a pipeline analysis. So if you think about it from a student perspective, as they go to college, we want to know how many of them are in having to take remedial math or English, because that's really sets students up to whether or not they're going to likely be successful through the pipeline. So this is just an example from a particular college. So in this particular case, 92% are taking remedial math, 84% are taking remedial English. And we would suggest that not all of those students necessarily need to take those basic skills courses. So one thing to be asking about this particular issue would be, are foster youth being included in any efforts to improve the placement process, such as using multiple measures or high school transcripts? And is that having an impact, positive impact on students in reducing underplacement and getting more students accessing the transfer level courses? And then those students, what percentage of them are receiving financial aid? And this is a classic example where 82% were getting BOG fee waivers, but only 59% first-time students were getting Pell Grants. And so what does that tell us about the FAFSA completion process? And are there some things that we might be able to do armed with these data to talk to community partners and K-12 school districts about ways that we can help streamline that process? And then what are sort of the achievement metrics that you might be able to put together to paint a broader picture of the pipeline? So what percentage of students are getting a 2.0 compared to the non-foster youth population? And what percent in this particular case uses a college that actually provided a program, list of students within a program. In this particular case, they are getting a slight increase in students reaching a 2.0 that are in a particular program, which is a good thing to see. So there might be something there in terms of increasing efforts or making the case that this program might actually benefit the students and getting them academically successful, and so we might advocate for expanding the program to help more foster youth be successful. Okay, so just in terms of some words of advice around using these data, sometimes all of this data can be daunting, just in terms of its sheer volume, but also some of the lower performance numbers that we see. But it's important to be able to take stock in the fact that we kind of intuitively know some of these things, but having the data really compels us to not only make a stronger case for how we can better support foster youth, but also where we might home in on places that might have the highest leverage for it's important to really look at those bright spots and not, not just within or across other colleges, but also within your own college. So are there certain metrics that seem to be improving, or programs seem to be adding value, and really taking stock in the fact that we are making a difference, although it may not be as fast as we'd like. And it's really important also to remember not to try to fix everything at once. And so if you see some things within the data that are concerning, maybe pick one to really try to dig deeper into it. And it may involve, doing some more investigation. Oftentimes these data lead to more questions than they do provide answers. So thinking about how you might really talk to some of the foster youth through focus groups, or work with some of your community partners to really unpack what might be going on with students not accessing Pell Grants, or students not progressing in the way that we would like them to in the college. And really, pick those things where you actually might have leverage to make change, so that you're not beating your head against the wall for things that you can't. One thing that I think we always like to caution is that there are very discrete things that student support services can do to support students, and then there are sort of institutional barriers that are bigger than the whole, and both of those things are equally important to try to tackle. And there are things on college campuses that benefit foster youth that actually benefit all students if we do a better job of them. And then there are very discrete things that foster youth in particular, and even different kinds of foster youth in terms of their background and home situations might need in terms of support that we can improve. I think really just thinking about these data as being your ally and giving you more fuel to be able to be stronger advocates for foster youth is really important. So I think it really helps to illuminate the scale of the problem and be able to get it in front of decision makers. So using the dashboard to give you, be able to make presentations and be able to really highlight where the problems are that we need to solve. Having the hard numbers to back up the stories you've been telling for years is really important, because I think anecdotally we know a lot of these things, but having firm numbers that really prove the case can really strengthen the cause. And I think most importantly with all of this is really making sure that we're tying this back to any equity efforts that are going on within the colleges, and how we can differentiate the fact, different backgrounds of students, that we know foster youth are not just a standalone population, but they also vary in terms of their socioeconomic status. A lot of these outcomes differ by race and gender. And so really trying to bring foster youth into the mix of looking at disproportionate impacts of things that we do on college campuses can really be powerful ways to make sure that foster youth are front and center in terms of any equity efforts or equity plans, or even funding for equity and SSSP. These data can really help you make the case. We've done something similar, a similar dashboard for student athletics, and I just heard an anecdote from a college, an athletic director who used a dashboard to advocate for funding for student athletes, because he had firm data to show that what they're doing with student athletes is really improving certain outcomes for students, and was able to secure about $250,000 out of their equity funds to really improve programming for student athletes. And I think the same thing could be done for foster youth in a more effective way using all of these data. Okay, so that was a quick run through. I want to just pause and see if there are some questions. Deborah, is there a way to maybe open up the lines? Or I don't see anything on chat, but maybe can we unmute the participants?
So we usually ask folks to type their questions in the control panel probably on the right of your screen. And while we're waiting to see if anyone posts any questions, I'd like to ask, you said you're now loading the 2014 and 2015 data, and I know there are a lot of folks who've started programs in this past year. They're going to be eager to see the data from the point where they've had their program. So can you give us a little more insight about the timeline for when data gets loaded? So when would they see, for instance, the 2015-16 data and so forth?
Yeah, in fact, actually, we have both of those. So the data we historically we get it twice a year, and but the end of year is really the most powerful, and that's usually something we get from the Chancellor's Office around the October timeframe. So we just got it, and then it takes us about 3 weeks or so to load it. So we're running it right now, and so I think by probably by the end of next week, it'll all be up to date with new programs. And then what I would encourage colleges to think about is starting now to work with your IR department about getting some rosters together for students that are in particular programs that you're interested in, so that we can have that kind of comparison in there as well. We've had a few colleges do that, but I know it can be a little bit of a process for advocates on the college campus that may not necessarily be the person who has access to the data. So if there's any help or support that you need, certainly you can reach out to us, but it would be worthwhile trying to get those files together and start loading them in so that you have a complete set of information.
Okay, so then it's around this time of year, each year, that they can expect to see the data loaded from the previous year. Is that fair
Correct.
to say?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And we have a good system now where I was just going to say that we're getting refreshes on data. Historically, we've just get like a snapshot. And the important thing for foster youth is that we're always improving, and colleges are always sort of updating their data. And so we'll be increasingly more accurate on the foster youth reflection of what happens at a local college versus what's in the state system. And we'll be starting to do that on a quarterly basis. So this will get better and better as we go. But I think by the end of next week, I would encourage people to go back in if they want to get some more current data, and that should be up.
Okay, then I would like to ask about another piece, or I'd like to make a comment and see what you want to add to that, which is the fact that a lot of folks are getting lists of foster youth from maybe their IR department and using those for outreach to try to bring people into their programs. And there's the potential, I guess there's the need to recognize that the information that IR might get or what you're developing in your program may not necessarily translate into more accurate data in the MIS system and then the CalPASS Plus system unless IT is involved in actually making sure that the behind the scenes details are adjusted to make sure that students are flagged properly in the system and tracked in the way it's loaded into MIS. Is that fair to say? Is there anything you can add to how to make sure that IR and IT are all communicating?
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, ideally what's coming out of the IR department or the IT department to a foster youth coordinator would be reflective of what's in their student information system, and that would also be reflected in what's being reported to the state. But what the best practice here, and what I would encourage folks to advocate for, would be to have a two-way communication with the IR department, where the foster youth coordinators or advocates on the college campus may have access to information about students who are foster youth that are not reflected in those roles that they get. And if there's a way for them to be able to provide that back to the IT folks, or at least the IR probably is the best avenue to update it, and then provide that back to the chancellor's office would be an ideal situation. So whether that's giving those folks the ability to manually go ahead and update it and change it, or whether it's just a check-in every once in a while to be able to provide that information back to the person that would be best to upload it.
Okay, great. Well, I think we're really at the limit of the time we had set for the webinar, and I'm going to take the fact that we didn't get more questions to be that this was so thorough. And Ken, I think you are just incredibly great at explaining the data in the dashboard and how it works. So I'm sure everyone will find that they've got a great tool in front of them and it'll be much easier to use it. Could you switch to the next slide so we can show the places to get help, the contacts? So if you want to get support, you can always go to our website. We have lots of resources on data. And again, this webinar will be, the recording and the slides will be on our website under the Conferences and Webinars tab. And then you can always contact Debbie Raucher at John Burton Foundation because she is our data expert. And Ken is kind enough to include his email address here. And then the next slide.
And I would say that picture.
Oh, yeah.
Not Debbie.
That was actually an artifact from a conference presentation last week, and was part of a joke that we were running through. That, yeah. So good point, Ken. And it's not Ken either. And then, of course, on the California College Pathways website, well, that's the one we just had. There's our web address for you to find more information and support for making sure your data is as good as it can be. And then there's another website called Data for Decisions from WestEd that can help you get more insight about making sure you have good data. And we know that good data is how you're going to build and strengthen the programs that you already have, and maybe add programs that you need. And I think at this point, we've answered all the questions I can see. And so we thank you for your attendance and for all the support you give to students, and look forward to the next time. Bye now.
Thanks, everybody.